We're holding Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph, the top of the Amud, the beginning of the page. Tanya Namihachi. It was also taught thus in a brisa. Now I've shared with you a link in the chat, and I'm sharing it on my screen as well. And here is the years from the beginning of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar and the whole calculation as it goes through. So they start from the year 0. Nebuchadnezzar conquers Nineveh and becomes king, which we mentioned in the Gemara. Then the first year is when Nebuchadnezzar conquers Yehoiakim and appoints him as a vassal king. In the 4th year, Yehoiakim rebels against Nebuchadnezzar, and as a result, Nebuchadnezzar gets rid of Yehoiakim, and he appoints his son Yehoiakim in his place. Now, Nebuchadnezzar quells Yehoiakim. Excuse me, let me repeat that. For 3 years, Yehoiakim actually served under Nebuchadnezzar. It was in the 7th year, meaning 3 years later, that Yehoiakim rebels against Nebuchadnezzar. So, excuse me, I was right. So then in the year 7, it could be that the rebellion wasn't quashed straight away. So it was quelled. He quelled Yehoiakim's rebellion. He kills Yehoiakim and appoints his son Yehoiakim in his place as vassal king. That's in the year 7. Now in the year 8, Yehoiakim rebels against Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar exiles him to Bavel and appoints Yehoiakim's brother Tzidkiyahu in his place. And then in the year 19, Nebuchadnezzar blinds and exiles Tzidkiyahu and destroys the Beis Hamikdash on the 9th of Av. Now, in the year 45, he dies. Nebuchadnezzar dies after 45 years, right? His son, Evil-Merodach, is coronated in his place, and that's when he let Yehoiakim go out. He released him. And in the year 67, Evil-Merodach dies after reigning for 22 years, and his son Belshazzar is coronated in his place. Now, Belshazzar, right, in the year 69, makes a mistake in his calculation of the 70 years duration of Golus Bavel. And as a result, when his second year passes, he celebrates the Jews, that the Jews were not redeemed, and he defiles the holy vessels of the Beis Hamikdash. He's killed that very night by Dariyavish, the Mede, who succeeds him to the Babylonian throne. In the year 70, Dariyavish, after killing Belshazzar, rules for 1 year, besides completing the year that Belshazzar started immediately before his death. Then in the year 71, kingship passes from Dariyavish to Koresh, the Persian, and he fulfills the prophecy that Hashem's Pekida, which means to remember, and that's going to be important for the Gemara, right? That Hashem's remembering of the Jewish people after 70 years from the time of Nebuchadnezzar's rise to power. Because as we'll see from the Gemara, what we're going to say is that Hashem remembered the Jewish people, and therefore Dariyavish gave the decree to allow the Jewish people to go back up and to begin the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash. And although it was stopped and they only managed to build the foundations, but nevertheless it's enough to call it a Pekida, a remembering. Then in the year 74, Koresh dies after reigning for 3 years, and Achashverosh becomes king in his place. In the year 76, Achashverosh makes his mistake, which was what our whole Gemara was all about, right? Because we start with Achashverosh, right? Achashverosh, Kisheves Hamelech Achashverosh, when he was rested, in other words, he started to feel comfortable, is he made the mistake of his calculation of the 70 years, right? Thinking that the 70 years have passed from the time of the Golus of Yehoiakim, which we said was 1. If you go back up, the Golus of Yehoiakim was in year 8, right? So that's where he made his mistake. And so he celebrates that the Jews were not redeemed by also, once again, taking out the Kalim of the Beis Hamikdash and defiling them. And then in the year 86, the miracle of Purim happens, which is in the 12th year of the reign of Achashverosh. And then Achashverosh dies after reigning for 14 years, and his son Dariyavish inherits the throne. And finally, in the year 89, Dariyavish gives permission to Ezra to return to Eretz Yisrael to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash, which is exactly 70 years after the Churban of the Beis Hamikdash, which happened in the year 19. of Nebuchadnezzar. So again, I've shared this in the chat. You can access this whenever you want. And let's go back to the Gemara. Okay, does everybody have it? I'll just share it one more time in the chat, just in case anybody wasn't able to get it. Okay, let me close this and let's go. Says the Gemara. The Gemara is now going to cite a brisa that proves that Nebuchadnezzar and the evil Merodach's reigned a combined total of only 67 years and not 68, because the mistake that they made, that the Belshazzar made, was by not realizing that it wasn't complete. The years were not complete. So let's see what the Brisa says. Tanya Namachi. We're holding the top of Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph. Tanya Namachi.
Rabbi.
Yes.
I just wanted to tell, maybe people don't know, but if you click on that link in the chat, you just click on it and then just come back to the class. You'll be able to go later to the page after the class is over and look at it.
Right. So Tanya Namahachi, it was taught like this in the Brisa. There was yet another year for the 70 of Bavel, which means to say that when we say that Bavel was going to have an ascendancy for 70 years and they would rule over the Jewish people for 70 years, right? There was still another year left for Bavel. And Darius, who was the Mede, he arose and he reigned for the 1 year, thereby completing the 70 years that were prophesied in Yirmiyahu, in Jeremiah. Rava said, after when it comes to the 70 years, even Daniel, he made an error in this calculation. It says in the pasuk in Daniel, in the first year of his reign, of whose reign? Of Darius the Mede, right? It says, "Ani Daniel be noisy basfarim." He says, "I Daniel contemplated the calculation." Rashi also explains that the sfarim, it's not books, but rather the calculations, like misparim are numbers, right? So svarim is the calculations. So from the fact that he says, I contemplated, it means that we can infer from this that he initially made a mistake, and that's why he had to contemplate to try and get greater clarity as to how to understand the 70 years. Okay, but nevertheless, we have a problem. There are verses that seem to contradict one another, and this was in fact raised in one of the previous shurim. I think Ezra raised this issue, that at the end of the day, Ksiv Melois LeBavel, it says in Yirmiyahu, when 70 years are completed for Bavel, and it says over there that I'll remember you. And here, from this pasuk, it's implied that the 70 years of the exile commenced from when Bavel gained control over the Eden, right? That's on the one hand. But on the other hand, in Daniel, Uksiv, L'charvesh Yushalayim, that it's not from the it's not from when Bavel gained control of the Jews, but from the time of the ruins of Yerushalayim. So it seems to me that these two psukim are conflicting with one another. They contradict one another because there's a vast difference between the time when Bavel rose over and subjugated the Jewish people to the time when they destroyed the Beis, they destroyed Yerushalayim, right, which was 18 years later. So Rava answers this by saying, Lifkida ba'alma. In the first pasuk, when it says Melois leBavel, it's talking about that Hashem promised that He would remember His people. V'hainu, this is what it says in the pasuk. Koi amar Koresh Melech Poras. This is what Koresh said, the king of Persia. Kol mamluches haaretz. All the kingdoms of the earth, Nasan li Hashem, Hashem has given to me, the God of the heavens. And He commanded me, and He appointed me or delivered to me that He appointed me, commanded me to build a temple for Him in Yerushalayim. And when was this? When was Koresh? Koresh was after Darius, after Daryavesh, which was in the year 70 exactly. So that's when Hashem remembered the Jewish people. And how did the Jewish people experience that? Remembering being not a full return to Yerushalayim, not a full redemption. And this was expressed by the beginning of laying the foundations again for rebuilding the second Beis Hamikdash. Okay.
Rabbi,
yes.
The emphasis on the word pakod, is
Yes.
this connected to pakod yifkod and pakod pakadati?
That's correct. But it's also Hashem pokad es Sarah. Hashem remembered Sarah, right? So this idea of remembering is something where, even in the time of Mitzrayim, where it says pocket pokadati, they didn't leave immediately. There was a process. Moshe Rabbeinu came and he had to bargain with Parai. There was a process. It didn't happen all in one shot. So to over here, there was a remembering. There was the beginning of the Jewish people going back to Eretz Yisrael and starting to lay the foundations. And although it was met with a lot of obstacles along the way, but nevertheless, this was the beginning of the remembering of the Jewish people. So now, the Gemara is going to digress and talk about the role that Cyrus had in Jewish history. And in fact, it seems, you'll see from this Gemara, it's his fault that we're still here in Golus, because as we'll see. Darash Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda expounded, my dichsiv. What does it mean when it says in the pasuk, this is what Hashem said to his Mashiach, to Koresh, right hand I have held. Was Koresh Mashiach? Koresh wasn't even Jewish. How can you call him Mashiach? So we say as follows. Rather, what it means is that Hashem said to Mashiach, I'm going to complain to you about Koresh. What happened? He says as follows. This is the discussion between Hashem and Mashiach, the real Mashiach, right? That what? Ani amarti, I said, who yivne beisi v'kametz galuyosai. I proclaimed that he, meaning Koresh, would build my house and gather my exiles, right? In other words, Hashem wanted Koresh to participate personally in the construction of the Beis Hamikdash and bringing all the people back to Eretz Yisrael. V'hu amar, but Cyrus, what did he say? Mi b'chem mikol amoy, whom among you from his entire people, and then he goes on to say, Hashem be with you, etzel v'yal, and let them go up to Yerushalayim, which is in Yehuda, and let him build the temple. In other words, he gave permission and he sent them on their way. So although it's a wonderful thing when you have somebody who is a foreign power allowing the Jewish people to go back to their land, to build their own Beis Hamikdash and to rebuild Yerushalayim. But nevertheless, if you were appointed by Hashem to go and rebuild Yerushalayim and to gather the people back in, you should have personally participated. And he didn't. And because he didn't, that's why he was criticized. Hashem criticized Koresh to who? To Mashiach. And some of the Mepharshim say that what this means is Hashem was telling Mashiach, it could have been your time right now. It could have been your time. But because Koresh didn't act with
alacrity
and self interest, like to put his own personal interest involved into the building of the Beis Hamikdash, that's why we are still here today. But these stories always bother me because it's like, what is it? Could have, would have, should have. Anyway, Mashiach has to come now. That's the bottom line.
The problem I see is that Koresh, having gone through all these changes that occurred before he came into power, he was probably always had in the back of his mind, if I leave the capital, I may not come back to something that I'm, that I expect.
Right. But if you have God yourself come along and tell you something, then you need to have trust. You need to have trust in Hashem. Hashem came along and he proclaimed, Koresh himself was the one that proclaimed that God had told him and commanded him to go and rebuild Yerushalayim. So if you've got that personal message from Hashem, how could you imagine that something bad would happen to you as a result of listening to Hashem?
Yeah, but he still had his own gods, and he didn't trust them. So why, fine, God told him, right? So he's spoken to his gods as well, and at times that hasn't happened. So, had he gotten rid of all of his gods and said, okay, Hashem is, and therefore I will follow him, that's one thing. But that's not what he did.
Right. I hear you. All right. So now the Gemara goes back to the continued explanation and analyzing the verses of the Megillah. So it says, Chil Paras Umodai Hapartimim. It says the army of Persia and Media, the nobles. Okay. Uksiv Malchei Modai Oparas. And it says elsewhere of the kings of Media and Persia. Now you have to hone in the order of the way it's written. In the first pasuk, it's first Paras and then Modai, which means when we say the Partimim, right, which are the nobles, then the Medians, these people from Modai, they are just nobles. They're not kings. The kings are going to be from Persia, like Achashverosh was from Persia. But then at the end of the Megillah, right, and he says Halohem Ksuvim, that all these things were written elsewhere, right? So it says the Malchei Modai Uparas, of the kings of who? Not Paras, but Modai, and then Persia. So how do you reconcile it suggesting that the kings are from Modai in the last verse, and they're not from Modai in the first verse? So the Gemara explains the discrepancy as follows. Amar Rava says, Asnuye Asnu Bahadodi. They had this pact, they had this agreement with one another, which is as follows. That if the kings of the realm come from our people, then governors will come from your people. And if kings come from your people, then the governors will come from our people. And therefore, when you had in one pasuk one way and the other pasuk the other way, it's because it wasn't always the same. Sometimes the kings came from Persia, and then the nobles were from Modai, and sometimes it was the reverse. Okay. Then the Megillah continues, says Bahar Oisai es Oishe Kevoid Malchusai, that he displayed, who's he? Achashverosh. He displayed the riches of his glorious kingdom. Omer Rabbi Yesi Bachanina said, Melamed, this teaches us that he donned the priestly garments at this occasion. How do we know from the fact that it says as Oishe Kevoid Malchusai that this refers to the big dekuna, the priestly garments? So he says as follows. It says over here, Yikar Tiferes Kedulasai, right? The honor of his splendorous greatness. Uksiv Hasam Lechaved Ulesifares, and it's written over there with regards to the big dekuna that they are for glory and splendor. So since we have in the Megillah Yikar Tiferes Kedulasai that he showed off the honor of his splendorous greatness. So, and when it talks about the big dekuna, it talks about how they were created lechavid ulesifares, for glory and for splendor. So that's how we know that when he came and he showed off his splendor, it was by putting on the big dekuna, the garments of the Kohen Gadol. The Megillah continues, and when these days were filled, meaning only after Achashverosh had entertained those people living in distant lands, did he then invite all the people that were living in the capital, right? Because he made a party. It seems that he invited all the people from distant lands to come to this party, and then at the conclusion of that initial stage, that's when he invited everybody from Shushan Abira. So Rav Shmuel, there's a discussion between Rav and Shmuel whether this was smart or this was stupid. So Chad Amar Melech Pikachaya, One says that this indicates that Achashverosh was a clever king. The Chadoma, one says Melech Tipashaya. And this story itself indicates that he was a foolish king. The one who says that Achashverosh was a clever king, it's Shapir Avad. It was very well what he did. The Koriv Rechika Bereisha, that he invited the outlanders to a feast first. Why? The Bnei Masei call Amos the boy Mephias lahu, for he could appease the people of his own city anytime he wished. They're always there, so they were always nearby. So therefore, they felt whoever it was that was of the opinion that this shows that he was clever. It was that in order to be able to make sure that all his subjects are taken care of, he invited the ones from the distant first, because the ones that were nearby, he could always placate them at any time he wanted. The ones who said that he was actually a fool, because they're of the opinion that he should have invited the people of his own city first. Why? Because if these people of your own city, right, are going to rebel against you, then these residents of Shushan would have stood by and supported him. I'm sorry. So what the Gemara is saying is like this: that if you invite the people from distant land, distant provinces, and they come along and they're going to rebel against you, right? So then you don't have your locals to stand up and to support you and to defend against these rebels. So therefore, what you should have done is, Achashverosh should have done is first invite the locals and have them there as ardent supporters of you, that if anybody comes from a far off distant province that wants to come and rebel against you, they will be stopped by those from your from the local supporters that you have in Shushan. Okay, so now there's a discussion moving on between Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and his Talmidim. Shol Talmidim as Reb Shimon.
Rabbi,
Yes,
I'm sorry. It said here, Chad Amar,
Yeah.
Melech Pikeach Haya v'Chad Amar. But before that, they wrote two names, Rav and Shmuel.
that's correct.
Which one said Pikeach, which one said no?
That's a good question. I'm not sure, but I would assume that the first one is first and the second one is second. So the one who said,
I see. In
Melech
order it
Pikeach
was written.
Haya,
In order that it was written. Okay.
yeah, that's what I assume. Yes.
Not necessarily.
Okay. So now it says Sholu Talmidim of Reb Shimon ben Yochai. It's a very important question. The Talmidim of Reb Shimon ben Yochai asked him the following question: why did the enemies of Israel, which is a euphemism for the Jewish people of that generation, deserve extermination? In other words, why did this whole gezerah, this whole decree against them come? What did they do wrong? What was the thing that led to the whole decree of Haman? Yes, it's true, ultimately we were saved, but why did they deserve that this decree should be made in the first place? Amalehem. So he said to them, Imru Atem, you give a reason. You asked a good question. Let's see if you can give a good reason. So Amrullah, they said to him, meaning the Talmidim said to Reb Shimon bar Yochai, it's because they derive pleasure from the feast of that wicked one, meaning of Achashverosh. The Jewish people were invited to the feast, and the truth is, at that feast, there was going to be the degradation of the Beis Hamikdash and the Kohanim, and there was going to be znus over there. There was going to be immodesty, and there was going to be non-kosher food as well. Even though there was kosher food, there was going to be non-kosher food, and so on and so forth. And so, therefore, on the one hand, they shouldn't have gone, and even if they did go, they shouldn't have enjoyed it. They shouldn't have benefited from it. So that's what the Talmidim said to Reb Shimon bar Yochai. That's why they deserve this gezerah against them. So Reb Shimon bar Yochai says to them, in Cain, if that's so, if I'm following your logic, that this is a punishment for the people who went to the Su'udah of Achashverosh, so then Shebeshushan Yeragu, then let there have just been a decree against the Jewish people of Shushan to be killed. Shebechol ha'olam kuloi al yeragu, but the Jews in the rest of the entire world should not have been ordered to be killed. So Amrullah, so they answered to Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, okay, Emorator, you give us a response. You tell us why they should have why they were liable to this decree. Amalahem, so he answered them, he said to them, he said, because they prostrated themselves to an image in the days of Nebuchadnezzar, because Nebuchadnezzar erected a big statue of himself and ordered that everybody should bow down, and the Jewish people, because they were fearful for their lives, they bowed down to it. So Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai says, because of that, they were liable to for this gezerah. Amrullah, so Rabbi Shimon, so the disciples challenged Rabbi Shimon's explanation. They said to him, he says, if the Jews had indeed prostrated themselves to this golden image, should favoritism be shown in such a case? Meaning, why did they have a miraculous intervention from Hashem that saved them? Amalahem, so he answered them, the truth is, when the Jewish people bowed down to this idol, they didn't do it with real sincerity, but they performed the act of prostration only. And so that because they feared Nebuchadnezzar, but in fact they had no inner conviction and they did not believe in it at all. So
Rabbi,
yes,
the Steinsaltz Gemara says that this idol that they bowed down to, this is the idol that Nebuchadnezzar had made, and they recorded that the entire world bowed down before it except Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah.
That's correct.
Did you say that? I'm not sure if I missed that.
I did mention that Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah did bow down, but I did mention that it was something that he had erected, and he had, since he was ruler over the entire world, he made a decree against that everyone has to bow down.
I'm sorry, I must have missed it. Sorry.
I mean, the truth is, if you read the book of Daniel, you read the whole story, and it's an incredible story. And we know that Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were thrown into the fire as a result of not bowing down, and they were saved from it. But anyway, the point is that the Jewish people who did bow down, they didn't do it with sincerity, they didn't do it with inner conviction, but they just did it because they were afraid of Nebuchadnezzar. So since it was only superficial, since it was only outwardly, it's Afakadosh Baruch Hu loy asa iman elulafanim. Similarly, Hashem, blessed be He, dealt with them only outwardly, meaning to frighten them into repenting. But He actually never intended to exterminate the Jewish people. As it's written, this is in the book of Eicha, that for He does not afflict from His heart. And Hashem, he doesn't really mean it. It's just there to frighten the Jewish people so that they should come and do tshuva. Now, there were two opinions given over here: the Talmidim of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai and Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, although he found a technical problem with his students' response, it's not that they were actually wrong. The fact that they were nene from the su'uda, they derived pleasure from the su'uda of Achashverosh, seems to be the trigger why Hashem carried through on what on frightening them from what they had done in the time of Nebuchadnezzar. In other words, as follows: in the time of Nebuchadnezzar, they all bowed down to an idol. Hashem didn't exact that from them straight away. He was hoping that they would do tshuva for that, and some obviously did do tshuva, especially after witnessing what happened with Mishael, Hananiah, and Azariah. They realized they shouldn't have bowed down, and Hashem would have protected them. But nevertheless, when it came to the su'uda of Achashverosh, and the Jewish people then went, even though there was going to be idolatry there, and there was going to be snus over there, this was a display that the tshuva wasn't really a full tshuva, and as a result, And as a result, that's what triggered this outwardly frightening of the Jewish people by making this decree of Haman. So they were both correct. It's both Reb Shimon bar Yochai was correct that it was because of Nebuchadnezzar, because they bowed down in the time of Nebuchadnezzar, and also because of the fact that they went to the Su'udah of Osei Russia. Okay. So now the Megillah continues by describing the scene at the feast. So it says as follows: Bechatzar Ginas Bisan HaMelech, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. Rav Shmuel. So there's a discussion or dispute between Rav and Shmuel what this actually means. Chad Amar, one says, Haroyu lechatzer, lechatzer. The one who's worthy of going to the court were brought to the court. Haroyu legina. Those who were worthy of going to a step up, which was to the garden, were brought into the garden. Haroyu lebisan, lebisan. Those who were worthy of the palace were brought to the palace. So in other words, there was 3 tiers of where people belonged. Some people belonged just in the courtyard, others in the garden, others in the palace. That was what one of them said. And the other one said, no, Chadama, Sivan bechotze v'lo hechzikasan. First, initially, Achashverosh brought everybody to the court, but it couldn't accommodate everybody. So Begina, that he sat them in the garden, that too wasn't big enough to accommodate the crowds. Until he finally brought them into the palace, and that was large enough to accommodate all of them. The Rasnisa Tana was taught in a Brisa, a different explanation of all these 3 areas as follows. Haishivan bechotzer, he sat them in the court, and he opened 2 portals for them. One was leading to the garden, and one was leading to the palace. Okay. The Megillah continues. Chur, karpas, uscheles. There were hangings of chur, karpas, and tcheles, which we know tcheles is blue, but we want to know what is chur and karpas. So my chur, what is chur? Rav Amar, Rav says, chari chari. It was holes, which means they had these tapestries that were made of needlework, which is why it's called chur, because there were many holes, and these were the things that were hung up around. Shmuel Amar, and Shmuel says, melos levana hitzialahem. That chur is from the word chiyura, which is white. Chavra, so it's white. So it's the white wool that he spread out for them. That's what the white. That's what the chur was. It was white. What's the karpas? What's the definition of karpas? It's not what you dip in the salt water. Karpas over here, he says, is as follows. It says karim shel pasim. It's a combination of 2 words. Kar pas. Karim shel pasim. Cushions made of fine wool. So the Megillah continues. Al glile chesed va'amudei sheish mitais zav v'chasef. They were upon silver rods and marble pillows, couches of gold and silver. Tanya, from the Brisa, Rabbi Yehuda says that what this means, mitois zav v'chesed, is that there were different types of couches. There were couches of gold and couches of silver. Those guests who were worthy of silver, lekesef, they were assigned to silver couches. Those who were worthy of gold, lazav, they were assigned to gold couches. Nehemiah said to him, no, that doesn't make sense. You know why that doesn't make sense? Then the seating arrangements is going to cause jealousy at the Suda. And anybody who's a party planner, right, would not want that to happen while you're trying to celebrate and invite everybody to celebrate your honor. If they're going to all start getting caught up with all these petty arguments, I belong here, I belong there, it wouldn't make sense to start making these distinctions of this one to the silver couches and this one to the gold couches. Allah, so rather, so Reb Nehemiah explains that the way he understands it is rather shel kesef v'ragleim shel zav, that the couches, all of them, were of silver and their legs were made of gold. So there were silver couches with golden legs. Okay?
Rabbi,
Yes.
The Steinsaltz, I'm sorry to interrupt. The Steinsaltz gives explanation from a commentary by the name of the Aruch,
Yep.
and he says that this explanation of Hur indicates that Achashverosh used porous fabric as partitions so that the attendees of his party could all see each other. And the word Hur comes from Cheres, meaning freedom, indicates that the partygoers wore clothing worthy of free men.
Okay. Shkoyach. Thank you. So now the Megillah continues to describe the extravagance at this feast of Achashverosh. It says in the Megillah, Bahat Vasheish, that the couches were on a pavement of Bahat and Sheish. What are these Bahat Vasheish? So Amr of Asi Avonim Shemis Choitatois Al Balehen. The floor was paved with stones much sought after by their owners and not easily obtained. So what they're doing over here is they're taking the hay of Bahat and they're exchanging it for a ches. So instead of Bahat, it's Bachat. They're very difficult to obtain by their owners. Their owners it's not easy to get these. That means they're very rare and very precious. And similarly, it says in the pasuk. This is in Zechariah. It says Avnei Nezeh Misnoisos Alad Mosai. It says stones of a crown obtainable after many trials over his land. So this is the kind of things that the pavement was paved with, were these special precious stones that are very difficult to obtain. Then it continues, V'dar v'secharis. It says in the Megillah that they were dar and secharis. So we have different interpretations of what dar and secharis means. Rav Omar Rav says, dore, that they were rows and rows of these precious stones that were all around them. Shmuel says, Evan Teva Yesh B'chrache Hayam. There's a precious stone in the cities by the water. V'dara Shema, and its name is Dara. Shahashiva Be'emsa Su'uda, and Achashverosh took this precious stone in the midst of his great feast, and it illuminated the area as if it were the midday. So it's a very precious stone that was able to radiate a lot of light. The Bey Rabbi Shmuel Tana, the school of Rabbi Shmuel, explained that what does this Vidav Secharis mean? Shekara Dera L'chol Balei Schera, that Achashverosh, although he was very hungry for tax money, but what he did this time was he proclaimed an abatement of the sales taxes for all the merchants, and so that made them to feel very free, right? Because when they did, when you don't have to pay taxes, it makes life a lot easier, right? So now the Megillah continues. The drinks were served in gold goblets, the goblets being diverse one from the other. So the Gemara asks that the expression used seems to be strange. It shouldn't have been Mikalim Shoinim, right, from different vessels, but rather Meshunim Miboile. It should have used the word Meshunim, which means diverse, rather than Shoinim, which, as we will see, Shoinim can be understood as repeating. So the Gemara answers and says, Amar Rava says, Yotzasa Baskal, there was a heavenly voice that came out of Amar Lahem, and he said to them, when these Kalim of the Beis Hamikdash were being brought out, then the Baskal made a proclamation. This heavenly voice said, Rishonim, Kolum Kalim, your predecessors, meaning Belshazzar, right? They were destroyed because they used the vessels of the Beis Hamikdash. V'atem sheinim b'hem, and you're repeating their mistake by also drinking from them. So that's why instead of reading Mikalim Meshunim, which would have meant diverse, different goblets, it says sheinim to allude to the fact that there was a Basko that went out and said that you guys are repeating the same mistake that was made before. You're making them again, making the same mistake again. Okay, the Megillah continues, V'yein Malchus Rav, and royal wine was in an abundance. So Amar Rav says that instead of saying V'yein Malchus Rav, it could have said Harbe, right? So why does it say Rav? The Lamed, it comes to tell us Kol Echad Ve'echad, that each and every person Hishkohu Yayin Shegod Limenu B'Shanim, that each person was served wine that was greater than he was in years. So if a person was 40 and he received wine that was 41 years old, and so on and so forth. The Megillah continues, and the drinking was according to the law. What does that mean? The drinking was according to law. Which law? My kados. What does it mean according to the law? Amar Reb Chanan says, Mishum Remeya, the name of Remeya, kados shel Torah, according to the law of the Torah. It's unbelievable, you know. As we go through all these psukim and the Torah, you know, it's very clear that the Chachamim are of the firm belief that everything that happens in the world revolves around the Jewish people. Okay? So when we read a story and we say that the drinking was in accordance with the law, which law must it be talking about? It must be talking about the law of Torah, as we'll see how he explains it, which is fascinating. What does this mean? It means that the Persians, right? Achashverosh, when he made his feast, when he gave instructions of how to have this feast, he must have looked to the way things were performed in the Beis Hamikdash and taken his cue from that. Just as the law of the Torah requires eating to exceed drinking quantitatively, which means to say quantitatively, which means like this, that when a person would bring up a korban, right, there were different offerings that were brought together with it, right? So you had the flour offering, and then you had the libations, which was the offerings of the wine. Now, the offering of the wine was less than the offering of the flour, which shows us that there had to be more food than drink. So too at the feast of the wicked one, Achashverosh, the eating exceeded the drinking. Yes, so that's what Rashi says. If you look at Rashi, just the first of the big lines, Kedosh Torah, Achilas Mizbeach, the consumption of the Mizbeach, Meruba Mishsia, was more than the drinking. Par Shloisha Esreinim, Soiles Lachila. So you bring a bull and 3 Esreinim of soiles, of fine flour, to eat, and the libations were only half of a hin. So that's where Achashverosh took his cue from in terms of how he would serve at his banquet. The Megillah continues, Ein oines, without coercion. Amar Rebbe Elazar says, Melamed, this teaches us, Shekol echad ve'echad, hishkahu miyein medinasai, that it was so, it was such an amazing feast, right? That each person was given the wine of his own province, which means to say, if I come to a place and I'm not used to certain foods or I'm not used to certain wines, right? If I'm going to start all of a sudden consuming them, it's going to upset my stomach. But if somebody gives me what I'm used to, then that's the best, right? The best is when I'm eating what I'm accustomed to and I'm drinking what I'm accustomed to. So when it came to serving the wine, he gave everybody the wine that they were accustomed to from their province. Says the Megillah, to do it according to every man's pleasure. What does this mean? Amar Rava says, Mordechai v'Haman. This means to do it according to the will of Mordechai and Haman. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean? Mordechai, it says Ish Yehudi. So we know that that when it says Kitzoid Ish, it refers to doing as Mordechai wished. And Haman is also called an Ish. Haman, Ish Tzar V'Oyev. It's by Haman, it says a man, an adversary, and an enemy. This is when Achashverosh asked Esther who would want to kill you and your people. So she called him Ish Sarv Oyim. So when it says to do as the wishes of Mordechai and to do as man and as each man, it's referring to who? It's referring to Haman and to Mordechai. So what that means is like this. According to Rashi, if you look at Rashi, it means Hem Hoyu Sari Hamashkim Bamishta. They were the ones in charge of the wine of the drinks at this party. Okay.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I'm thinking if they had kosher wine at that time, then maybe that was the difference.
It's
between
true.
Haman and Mordechai.
No, they did have kosher wine, of course.
Okay. So
what happened?
So that's ish and ish.
Right, that's correct. But the thing is like this: the Jewish people, they turned to Mordechai and they asked whether they should go to the party, and he told them not to go. Right?
Yeah.
But they made their own calculations and said, "Look, Mordechai's going to be there. It's under rabbinic supervision." But Mordechai had to be there. He didn't have a choice, right? He had to be there. He had to be there, but he told everybody else that they shouldn't go, but they didn't listen to him. All right. So now the Megillah continues and says as follows: Gam Vashti Amalka also saw Mishtei Noshim Beis Hamalchus. Queen Vashti also made a feast for the women in the royal house of King Achashverosh. Said Frank the Gemara. Beis Hanoshim Mibayalei. The Megillah should have said that Vashti's banquet took place only in the woman's house. Why does it say, which was a more private location, not frequented by men? So Rava says like this: Shneim lidvar avera niskavnu. Both Achashverosh and Vashti intended to commit immoral acts, and therefore Vashti's feast was held in the king's house in close proximity to the men, because she also intended for immoral acts to take place at her party. She knew that they were going to get drunk, and there was going to be things to intoxicate the women too, and she had no problem with these immoral acts taking place. Hada Amri Inchi, this is what the popular saying is: Iyo Bukari, he with large pumpkins, V'itase, and his wife Bibitsnaya with small pumpkins. Meaning the evil man and his wife both engaged in the same behavior. Okay. Now we're on Daf Yud Beis, Amud Beis, and it says as follows: Vayei Mashvi was on the seventh day, Ketov Leiv HaMelech Vayoyin, when the king's heart was merry with wine. Frank the Gemara, Atu Ad Hashta, Tavle B'Chamra, was his heart not merry with wine up until the seventh day? So why are you saying that it was the seventh day when he was Ketov Leiv HaMelech Vayoyin? What took so long? So obviously it's not that it took 7 days for him to get drunk or anything like that, but rather Rava says Yom Hashvi Shabbos Haya. The seventh day was on Shabbos. Yisrael, and it's the reason why. The pasuk in the Megillah tells us by Yom Hashvi Ketov Leiv HaMelech Vayoyin is to praise the Jewish people. Yisrael, where the Jewish people, when they eat and they drink on Shabbos, they begin discussing words of Torah and words of praise for Hashem. But when it comes to the idolaters, when they begin to eat and drink, they start discussing only indecent matters. That's indeed what took place in the feast of the wicked one, Achashverosh, that they began discussing indecent matters. These ones started to say, that the women from Madai, they're the most beautiful. And the others would say, Parsi is nice, the women from Persia are the most beautiful. Achashverosh said to them, the vessel that I use, meaning his wife, Ella Madai. Parsi, it's not from Madai and not Persian, Elakazdi from the Chaldeans, but she is the most beautiful. Is it your wish to see her? So they answered him and they said, yes, we want to see her. Or Vilvad, but provided Aruma, that she should be unclothed, right? That's how they wanted to see her, unclothed. So now, why did Vashti not come, right? In other words, the Gemara had just said that just as he was immoral, she was also immoral. So now she has a chance to be immoral and immodest in front of men. So why shouldn't she come? So the Gemara answers as follows. And this was specifically on Shabbos, because she made the in light with the measure that a man measures. They, meaning the heavenly, the court, they measure out to him. In other words, in the way one behaves towards Hashem, Hashem will deal towards you. Melamed, it teaches us Vashti Harsham Via Benois Yisrael, teaches that wicked Vashti, she used to bring the Jewish girls Umar Shitan Arumais, and she would make them be unclothed. And she would make them do work on Shabbos. So therefore, as a punishment, Hashem made it and orchestrated that it should be that on Shabbos, she should be ordered by Achashverosh to come and be unclothed in front of all the other men. This is what it says in the pasuk. After these things, after the wrath of Achashverosh had subsided, Zochar es Vashti, he remembered Vashti, the Eis Asher Asosa, and what she had done, the Eis Asher Nigzaleh, and what had be decreed upon her. What does that mean? He realized it's not what had been done to her, but rather it's what she did, and not what he did to her, but what was decreed upon her, which means to say, Achashverosh recognized that this was all orchestrated by Hashem to repay to her for the acts that she had done. So, Eis Asher Sasa, what she had done to the Jewish girls, Eis Asher Nigza Aleha, and that which had been decreed upon her by Hashem. That's what he saw. So that's explaining that episode. But now, it doesn't. We keep on talking about that episode, because so far we've just said that Achashverosh has called her, and we haven't yet discussed the fact that she refused. So the Gemara goes back to the narrative of Achashverosh's confrontation with Vashti, and it says Vatimoyin Hamalka Vashti, that Queen Vashti refused. So now the Gemara analyzes Michti. Let us see. Pritzta Havya. She was a lewd woman, as we've already described, right? That's why she was the Amamash Nehem Ledvarav and Diskavnu. Because as we just said above, that both Achashverosh and Vashti intended to act immorally. So my time Eloy Asya. So why didn't she come? If she was this was the prime opportunity, to be immoral and to be lewd. Amar Rabbi Yesi Baruch Hanina. So Rabbi Yesi Baruch Hanina said, Melamed, this teaches us that she broke out in leprosy. And so now, of course, nobody wants to appear naked when they're full of leprosy, because obviously you don't look beautiful, you look horrible. But in a Brisa, we're taught a different reason why she didn't come. Because it says, Bo Gavriel, the Malach Gavriel came, Malach Gavriel came and made her grow a tail. Okay, so now obviously you can understand why she didn't want to come. Okay, so the pasuk concludes and says, "Vayiksef hamelech ma'od." The king became greatly incensed by her refusal. Now, seemingly, of course, a refusal is a terrible thing. But why did he fly off the handle? I mean, she just said no. Well, why fly off the handle? So I'm frank the Gemara. Why did his anger burn within him so much? Why was he so angry? Rava. So Rava says, Shal Chalei, it's because Vashti sent him a message. And she said as follows: Bar Ahur Yorei, the Abba, you stable boy of my father, who was Belshazzar, Amo lekovel alpha chamra shosi v'leirav. My father drank the equivalent of what 1,000 people drink, and he did not get drunk. Vahu gavra, and that man, meaning you, Achashverosh, eshtate bechamra, you became foolish from your wine. So, in other words, she was insulting him. She's saying, "Listen, you're a drunk. You can't handle your booze." So, biyad, straight away upon hearing this, his anger burned within him. So now he wants to know what to do with her. He's all upset with her. What should he do? So says the Gemara, King says to the wise man, who are these wise men? Says the Gemara, Man, Chachamim, Rabbanon. Who are the wise men? These are the Rabbanon. How do we know that they're the Rabbanon? Because it says, Yedei Ha'itim, who know the times. They know how to intercalate the years and establish the month of the Jewish calendar. So Amalahu, he said to them, Dainuha. He said to Dainuali, I want you to judge Vashti for me. In other words, what should I do with her? Amru, they said to themselves, Hey David, what should we do? It's like between a rock and a hard place. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. No matter what you say, you're going to get into trouble, right? If we're going to tell her to kill her, what's going to happen is tomorrow he's going to sober up. And then he's going to demand her from us and say, well, what's going on? What? You decree that she'll be killed? It's all your fault. I don't have a wife. If we tell her, leave her alone, and don't punish her, then comes Zalzala the Malchusas. And now you are your comes Zalzala the Malchusa. We cannot because she demeans the crown. And so therefore it's going to be a disrespect to Achashverosh if we say to leave her alone. So Amrullah, so in order to be able to get themselves out of a difficult situation, they said to Achashverosh, since the time of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, from the day that the temple, that we were exiled from our land, is nitla etza bimeno, the ability to give counsel has been taken from us because of the tribulations and the upheavals of our exile. So therefore, our minds are not settled to be able to give good advice. The ain only London did in Fashish, and we no longer know how to judge capital cases. Zil gabe amoy lomoyav. The Yosvei v'duchtayu, go to Ammon and Moav, who remain settled in their places. They haven't been exiled, right? And let them be the ones to decide. The Yosef al-Durdaya, like wine that sits on its sediments. In other words, because it hasn't, the bottle has been shaken up, so the wine is settled on its sediments. Everything is rested. Everything is not, all shaken up, and they'll be able to give you good advice. Says the Gemara. What time Amru? What time Amrulay? What the rabbi said to him was indeed reasonable. In other words, they said very well. They spoke well. They seem like it says, Sha'anan Moav Menu'urav V'sheketu Al Shmarav. It says Moav has been at ease from his youth, and he is settled on his sediments. V'layhurak mikli el kli uvagila leholach, and he's not been poured from vessel to vessel, nor has he gone into exile. And so therefore, they're very settled, and they're able to give al kain omad taimoi. Because they haven't been poured from vessel to vessel, and they've been at ease from the youth. That's why his taste has remained in him, and his scent has not changed. And so therefore, it was a very good answer that the Chachamim gave to. That's a good answer that the Chachamim gave to Achashverosh. And what happened? So the Gemara says. It says miyad straight away. V'hakorav elav karshna sheisa mosa sarshish. The ones closest to him was karshna sheisa mosa sarshish, and they were the ones ultimately who were going to deliberate until Memuchan came. Well, Susi is Haman, and he said to that what they should do is they should send out these letters, they should kill Vashti, and they should send out these letters that everybody should be the ruler in his house. And we will stop here and Mitzvah Hashem pick up from here tomorrow. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Hey,
Have a
everybody.
blessed day.